Welcome to class, folks. We are still in chapter 5.1. This is part B or part 2. We're going to factor out the greatest common factor. If you are asked to factor something like this, you are just to find the greatest common factor and bring it out of the polynomial. In this case, the greatest common factor is a 15, so that's what I'm going to bring out. Now, I need to realize what's going to be left over. So I have to look and say, well, 15 times something is going to give me 30x. Turns out it's going to be 2x. And then I have to look and see what is going to give me a negative 15 if I multiply it by 15. Turns out it's going to be negative 1. So this is this factored completely. Here, my greatest common factor would be a 7. So I'm going to factor out a 7. And notice what I get. I end up with a 6x. So if I check, 7 times 6x will give me a 42x. 7 times negative 1 will give me a 7. Remember, the key here is factoring out the greatest common factor. Alright, my next problem, as far as with 24 and 18, 6 would be my common factor. Looks like I have one C and one D in each at least. So 6CD would be my greatest common factor. And if I think this through, I can see, okay, well, in order to get my negative 18CD after I look at my common factor, I'm going to need a 3 and I'm going to need a C. So this is my final answer here. And again, you can always check. This times this should give you this, and this times this should give you this. And here, I did write an extra D. I double checked and went through and I was like, oh, here we go. So remember, always double check. Alright, with my next problem, my greatest common factor is going to be a 5 regarding the 25 and 15. Looks like I have 2 x's and 2 y's in each. So here's my greatest common factor. And after some head work, this should be my remainder. So this times this should give me 25 x to the 4th, y to the 3rd, which it does. And here's my final answer. I'm just left with a 3. 5x squared, y squared times negative 3 will give me this term here, this term. Alright, next I have a negative 24 and an 18. I believe I dealt with that somewhere up here. Looks like I'm going to factor out just maybe a negative 6. And I may change that at the end depending on how it looks, but for now negative 6. As far as a's, looks like I have 3 in each, and for the x's I have 1. Leaving me here with a 4a. This times this would give me this. And now be careful because I factored out a negative 6. That means that this sign here is going to switch to a negative, and it just turns out to be a negative 3. Here's my final answer, and I will leave the negative on the outside. I suppose it could go in here, but I think it's better this way because inside it would leave this being a negative and there's an a here. Normally we want to write our polynomials, which this is, with the variables in front. Alright, next I'm given something with 3 terms. I have a 12, a 16, and an 8. I think a 4 is probably going to work best, and then there's at least one x in each. And yeah, after a little head work, that's what I get, leaving me with a 3x squared plus the 4x minus the 2, and that would be my final answer as far as factoring. Alright, now here we're moving up to advancing the difficulty of these problems. Here you really have to put on your thinking cap and recognize, what do both of these have in common? They both are being multiplied by an x plus 2, so I can factor out the x plus 2. And that's going to end up leaving me multiplying all that by this y and this 3, and notice the plus sign is where I get my plus sign here. So this is this factored. And really here I have something very similar. I have a z times this and a 3 times this. The y plus 4 is what gets factored, and I'm left with the z plus 3. Alright, also something that looks a little strange, but again, recognize we have a y plus 1 in each. Now when I factor out my y plus 1, observe that over here I'm going to be left with an xy, and I think this is the important part. Over here I'm factoring out the whole y plus 1, so I'm going to be left with a 1 here because remember there's a phantom 1 involved. So here's my final answer, and if I look, y plus 1 times xy is here, and y plus 1 times 1 is there. All right, moving up again in difficulty here. Things are not so clear. You're going to have to sit here and stare at this for a little bit, but hopefully you will observe that in these two terms we have a 5 that I can factor out. Over here in these two terms, I believe I can factor out a y. So here, notice I've factored out a 5 from this, giving me a 5 times x plus 3. Now, luckily there are no negative signs to mess with, so I'm going to end up with a plus. And here I have factored out the y from these two terms. Now here, notice I end up with something like we had previous, where the x plus 3 can be factored out. And then left is going to be the 5 and the y. And this is my final answer. For my next problem, I do have negative signs, so I need to be careful. Looks like I have an x here I can factor out, and over here, again, you really have to think. I have a y here and y here. Do I want to use that to factor out? I think here I'm going to take out a 2, and over here I'm going to take out an x, see what I get. Alright, yeah, I kind of did get lucky because things seem to come out nicely. Well, if I take out a 2 here, I get a y minus 4. If I take out the x here, I get a y... Sorry, if I take out a x here, I get a y minus 4. And again, this turns out to be nice. So this is my final answer. And again, careful with the negative sign here. When I did my factoring, in both cases, the negative sign just ended up staying on the inside, and I factored out a positive. Okay, to end the section, I'm going to give us a problem like so. You know, this one I'm going to have to, again, stare at for a little bit, but I think I'm noticing the 3 and the 3 here. I'm going to factor out a 3 from these two here, and I'm going to factor out a y from those two and see what happens. So my first step is factoring out a y from here. So y gives me the y square, y times y squared gives me this, and I'm going to factor a y from here, leaving me with the 1. So now I have these two terms left. And yeah, that turned out to, I again kind of got a little lucky there. I factored out a 3 from this and this. That left me with the y squared. And then factoring out a 3 from here left me with a 1. Now I'm left with the y squared plus 1 in both terms. And here is my final answer. All right. See you next time. See you in chapter 5.2. Thanks for coming.